Hello everyone, in this video we are going to see the explanation of the poem She Walks in Beauty. But before that, let me tell you I'll be covering Maharashtra State Board Standard 12th English poems. She Walks in Beauty is a poem by Lord Byron which was published in the year 1814. The poem is a beautiful tribute to a woman's beauty, both physical and inner. Here is a detailed analysis of the poem. The theme Beauty. The poem explores the theme of beauty, both physical and inner. The speaker describes the women's beauty as a perfect balance of light and dark. Love theme. The poem is also a love poem, with the speaker expressing his admiration and adoration for the women. Nature theme. The poem uses natural imagery to describe the women's beauty, emphasizing the connection between nature and human beauty. There are poetic devices that are used in the poem. Imagery. The poem is rich in sensory details with vivid descriptions of the women's beauty, such as she walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. Metaphor. The comparison of the women's beauty to the night sky is a metaphor that emphasizes her beauty and its impact on the speaker. Alliteration. The repetition of S and SH sounds creates a soothing and musical effect. Personification. The poem personifies beauty, giving it human-like qualities such as walking and smiling. Structure of the poem is: the poem consists of 3 stanzas, each with a consistent rhyme scheme and meter. Its rhyme schemes are AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, which adds to the poem's musicality. The meter of the poem is primarily iambic tetrameter with 8 syllables per line. The poem uses symbolism such as night, stars, and clouds. The night sky symbolizes the women's beauty, which is mysterious, celestial, and awe-inspiring. The stars represent the women's inner beauty, which shines brightly and guides the speaker. The clouds symbolize the imperfections and flaws that make the women's beauty more relatable and human. The tone of the poem is admiration and reverence. The tone is one of the admiration and adoration, with the speaker expressing his awe and wonder at the women's beauty. The tone is also reverent, with the speaker treating the women's beauty as a sacred and transcendent thing. Here's a stanza-wise explanation of the poem She Walks in Beauty by Lord Byron. Stanza 1. She walks in beauty like the night. The poem begins by describing the woman's beauty as she walks, comparing it to the night sky. The phrase walks in beauty emphasizes the women's elegance and poise. Of cloudless climes and starry skies. The comparison to the night sky continues with the addition of cloudless climes and starry skies. This phrase emphasizes the women's beauty as celestial and awe-inspiring. And all that's best of dark and bright. The poem highlights the balance of dark and bright in the women's beauty. The phrase emphasizes the idea that women's beauty is not just physical but also inner and spiritual. Neat in her aspect and her eyes. The poem concludes the first stanza by emphasizing the women's aspect and eyes as the meeting point of dark and bright. This phrase highlights the women's beauty as a perfect balance of opposites. Stanza 2. Thus mellowed to that tender light. The second stanza begins by describing the effect of the women's beauty on the speaker. The phrase mellowed to that tender light emphasizes the softening and calming effect of the women's beauty, which heaven to gaudy day denies. The poem contrasts the women's beauty with the gaudy and artificial beauty of the day. This phrase emphasizes the idea that women's beauty is natural and authentic. One shade the more, one ray the less. The poem highlights the subtlety and nuance of the women's beauty. This phrase emphasizes the idea that women's beauty is not just about physical appearance but also about subtleties of expression and emotion. Had half impaired the nameless grace. The poem concludes the second stanza by emphasizing the idea that the woman's beauty is a delicate and fragile thing. This phrase highlights the idea that women's beauty is not just physical but also spiritual and emotional. Stanza 3, which waves in every raven tress. The third stanza begins by describing the woman's hair as a symbol of her beauty. The phrase waves in every raven tress emphasizes the woman's hair as dark, luxurious, and beautiful, or softly lightens o'er her face. The poem highlights the way the woman's beauty is illuminated by her expression and emotions. This phrase emphasizes the idea that women's beauty is not just physical but also inner and spiritual, where thoughts serenely sweet express. The poem concludes the third stanza by emphasizing the idea that the woman's beauty is a reflection of her inner thoughts and emotions. This phrase highlights the idea that women's beauty is not just physical but also spiritual and emotional. How pure, how dear their dwelling place. The poem concludes by emphasizing the idea that the woman's beauty is a sacred and precious thing. This phrase highlights the idea that women's beauty is not just physical but also spiritual and emotional. Stanza 4. And on that cheek and o'er that brow. The speaker continues to describe the woman's beauty, focusing on her cheek and brow. So soft, so calm, yet eloquent. The speaker emphasizes the softness and calmness of the women's feature while also highlighting their expressiveness. The smiles that win, the tints that glow. The speaker describes the woman's smile and the glowing color of her complexion, emphasizing their captivating effect. But tell of days in goodness spent. The speaker suggests that the woman's beauty is a reflection of her inner goodness and virtuous life, a mind at peace with all below. The speaker describes the woman's mental state as being serene and tranquil. The phrase all below refers to the worldly concerns and troubles that can disturb one's peace. The woman's mind is unaffected by these troubles, and she remains calm and composed. A heart whose love is innocent. The speaker highlights the woman's heart as pure and untainted by negative emotions. The phrase love is innocent suggests that her love is genuine, selfless, and free from ulterior motives. The exclamation mark emphasizes the speaker's admiration for the woman's innocent and loving heart. Together, these lines convey the idea that women's inner beauty is rooted in her peaceful and loving nature. I hope you find this video helpful and stay tuned for the next video. Thank you.